Contents under pressure are subject to cracking, be it physically or mentally. We're taking a quick peek at Narcosis. Nitrogen narcosis, also called raptures of the deep, is a drowsy state of mind caused by breathing in air under pressure, such as when deep-sea diving. Nitrogen is a main part of air, and unlike oxygen, it doesn't change as it makes its way through the human body. Divers of great depths are supplied with air that matches the pressure they'll be at once submerged so they can breathe normally. But this means that there is more nitrogen within that breathable air opposed to at sea level, and the amount only goes up as the diver goes farther and farther down. This high intake of nitrogen can cause all kinds of symptoms, from feeling intoxicated and lightheadedness to even panic, fear, and hallucinations. While narcosis is easily reversible just by having the person affected by it resurfacing with no long-lasting effects, it can be known to creep up on people before they fully realize that they are being affected by it. Due to this, these days, nitrogen and oxygen mist air is replaced with a helium and oxygen mix for super deep dives, along with basic checks and procedures to lessen the effects of narcosis. As if being trapped in the dark depths of the ocean under hundreds of feet of crushing water that's doing everything in its power to kill you doesn't sound horrific enough, Narcosis is also the name of a survival horror video game made by Honor Code Inc. that may or may not have something to do with nitrogen narcosis. I'm honestly not sure. While the name of Honored Code's first foray into video game development matches that of nitrogen narcosis, the game itself never uses that phrase, nor does any of its marketing material. Most people, like myself, won't know what the phrase even means unless they happen to be into deep-sea diving, and I'm not sure if it's better or worse to know what narcosis means after having played the game due to just what it does with its narrative. For the most part, Narcosis is a first-person exploration game with light puzzle and combat elements. A lot of this kind of thing is what people write off these days as a walking simulator, but Honor Code did their darndest to stop that from happening, even if it may have ended up hurting the game in the long run. This does mean that most of the gameplay revolves around plot and story more than game mechanics, and while I'm not always the biggest fan of these kind of games, let alone horror games, I really appreciate when the developers do them well. In my opinion, the best way to do these kind of games is to incorporate players into them through its core mechanics, making them feel like they're part of the narrative instead of just being little more than a moving camera. The story of Narcosis is a rather interesting one, both in and out of game. You take control of one of the members of Oceanova, some kind of underwater mining company who've built a large complex at the bottom of the ocean to harvest a crystallized version of methane gas called burning ice. Since the game would be rather boring without something going on, there is of course some danger in conflict, as an earthquake happens nearby the facility, causing all kinds of chaos and destruction to everything nearby, including the base, and of course, you. Deep underwater is the last place anyone would want to be when anything like this goes wrong, let alone when dealing with something like methane. It isn't long before players will find themselves trapped alone on the seafloor with nothing but their diving suit keeping them alive, and that's where the horror part of survival horror really kicks in. There are few choices down here for some kind of salvation. There's only 2 bases within the facility that are built specifically for crew quarters or research, and both have been compromised. Each one also has some kind of escape pod that can be used to reach the surface, but first you gotta get there, and not everything is interested in letting you do that. Underwater, oxygen is a very important factor and something that plays a huge role in Narcosis. The game does something unique with the idea of having to manage oxygen. It's something I haven't seen other games with oxygen meters do before, and that's by having the amount of oxygen used at any time depend on the situation players currently find themselves in. Fear, panic, or physical activity can cause human beings to breathe faster, and there's plenty of both down in the depths. While the character players take on the role of doesn't really speak, there is still plenty of narration going on throughout the game. It mostly takes place in the form of an audio interview between the last living member of the Oceanova crew and a radio host.
You call it a walking coffin. I can't even imagine what that takes.
It takes But when you're losing your strength and your senses, well, like I said, it helps you focus on what little's left.
Parts of the interview are only played at specific times as you progress through the game, and honestly, I found the writing and voice work here to be fantastic. Most video games that I've played don't have the greatest of stories, but every now and then you come across one that really seems to hit the mark. Released along with Narcosis was a book written by some of the developers at Honor Code, but packaged as if it was a true account of the events that took place within the game. While the story of the book and the story of the game are from two different perspectives, it's the book, titled Hell or High Water: Surviving Oceanova, that causes the interview to happen in the first place within the game's story, and it's a really interesting way of expanding the lore of a game.
Welcome back to Open Air. I'm Emily Kaler. If you're just joining us, my guest is Kip Mattis, sole survivor of the Oceanova disaster. His first book, Hell or High Water, is a harrowing account of his ordeal.
I honestly had a moment there where I wasn't sure if the game was based off of some real events that I just hadn't heard of. That is, till I discovered the events of both book and game take place in 2021, opposed to the release date of 2017. It's just a testament to how well the narrative is written that it could pull me in like that and make me think that Narcosis may be based on a true story kind of thing instead of being pure fiction. The voice work for the interview also does a great job at selling the idea of authenticity, even though there's plenty of outside information to find if you just want to look for it around the world itself. Since the interview is with the only surviving member of Oceanova, it's obvious that everyone else died in the incident, and there's evidence of that scattered everywhere. Each level or chapter has crew members who can be located or memorable items that can be found that will slowly fill in information about just who these people were and why they were there in the first place. Finding the dead bodies of friends and co-workers is not the greatest of experiences, and will make your character start to freak out and use more oxygen, so you gotta be careful about how much you search, where you search, and where any oxygen tanks or refill stations may be located. The game does a fantastic job at capturing the feeling of slowly hulking around in a diving suit by having basic movement be both slow and lumbering. It's kind of like those underwater sections of BioShock 2, but extended throughout a full experience opposed to just a small part of a larger game. The slow movement can get annoying at times depending upon how much someone has to retrace their steps or redo a section of the game if they happen to, well, you know, die. Having an oxygen meter means that oxygen can run out, and the lack of oxygen will cause human beings to stop living anymore. But that's not the only way to end up dead. Falling into deep pits will cause the extra pressure to destroy your suit, and walking across lava fields is a great way to be boiled alive. But that's not the worst of it. The ocean is a large place, with many living things within it. I do have to say, the devs did a great job with the amount of wildlife in this game and just how they used them. There's all kinds of freaky looking fish down there, but the game takes things one step farther. Since you are at the bottom of the sea, a place that sun can't really reach, at all, both animals and plants use bioluminescence to not only give players something pretty to look at, but also help them see to navigate. Your suit does have a built-in flashlight as well as the ability to shoot off flares if you really can't see where you're going, but it doesn't add much to the overall visuals of the game from a visual design standpoint, unlike the glowing fauna. Narcosis really has some great visual design in general for its outside spaces, as well as both beautiful and terrifying areas. The way the developers play with lighting as well as smaller details such as the monitors in your suit and how they reflect off of its visor helps to really set some great atmosphere that I found rather immersive. Narcosis refers to your suit as a walking coffin, and while it's a grim name to give it, at times it can really feel that way with the combination of audio design, visual design, and mechanical design. It makes the trek through a large area like the ocean feel claustrophobic and generally very alone. As the game goes on, things get weirder and weirder as the layout of indoor space sections become funhouse mazes full of all kinds of creepy whatnot. There's, of course, your repeating corridors and impossible geometry, and it really feels at times that you're being stalked by some sort of outside entity, while at other times you literally are! The best part of it is the ambiguity Narcosis is able to pull off through how it uses these sections of weirdness. Nothing within the game itself explains them, and it constantly had me wondering if there was something supernatural going on within the game world, or if my character was just slowly losing his mind due to the extremely stressful situation they find themselves in. Of course, not everything down here is friendly, and more than one thing will kill you if given the chance. Unlike the trend of helpless protagonists who can either only run and hide from danger or just flat out die, Narcosis lets you fight back. Just not all that well. Sadly, the diving suits aren't equipped with any kind of weapons, no machine guns, torpedo launchers, or even a spear gun. Instead, you got a little knife you can swing at things like cuttlefish or anglerfish in the hopes of killing them before they try to swallow you whole. Narcosis can be played with both your desktop computer or in virtual reality, and while that may be a great way to experience some of the game's atmosphere, I'm really not all that interested in being up close and personal with a cuttlefish while it tries to crush my head in like that, even if I did have access to VR. Some enemies, like the previously mentioned cuttlefish and anglerfish, as well as octopi, can be fought off with the pitiful knife, and if you're lucky, you can even kill the things before they get a chance to really attack you. Getting caught by these beasts will cause you to start to panic and use up oxygen, which makes sense. Even though air canisters aren't super rare throughout the game, you can still easily get yourself in a situation where you just can't reach the next one and die right in front of it. And it sucks. Generally, the best way to deal with fights is to just avoid them if possible. The diving suit may not be a giant robot covered in firearms, but it does have the flare launcher that can be used to scare away deadly creatures. Just be sure you're far enough away to not be sprayed by ink when they scutter off, or you may not be able to see where the heck you're going and could possibly walk off a cliff. While you do have a tiny little pocket knife to defend yourself with, it generally kinda sucks, and there are some enemies that just don't care that you're trying to stab them with it. These massive spider crab things will kill you outright if given the chance, and the game's autosave system isn't fantastic, meaning that it's very likely to play for 10 minutes or so, die, and then have to redo all that 10 minutes over again, dialogue included. On top of this, Narcosis has some light puzzles to solve along the way, and a surprising amount of platforming. The diving suit has short burst thrusters that can be used to get across gaps, but it was kinda difficult for me to get the hang of them, and I found myself just barely missing jumps more times than I can count. It gets even more annoying when you have to platform through a section where reality begins to warp around you, since the game's geometry can get a bit annoying to navigate, and the thrusters aren't exactly graceful. That being said, the messed up reality can take some of these somewhat tedious puzzles and make them that much more interesting with weird visuals going on. Like this giant lady in the middle of the room, just kind of there. I don't know why. Overall, I still found myself getting into Narcosis, even with its crappy combat, crappy platforming, insta-kills, and annoying save locations. Being able to fight back at all and have at least a little control of my chances to survive is great, and it meant that I didn't find myself instantly dying quite as much as in other modern horror games. But I can't say that I would call the game a survival horror per se. I mean, sure, you are trying to survive the nightmare situation that you're in, and there are plenty of weird and scary things going on for the game to fall into the horror category. But it doesn't match any mechanics of the survival horror genre. There isn't much in the way of resources to keep track of, such as an alone in the dark, nor any inventory of any kind. The only thing you gotta worry about is how much oxygen is in the tank in trying to hit enemies before they hit you. I'm not someone who plays much in the way of the horror genre these days due to the abundance of jump scares and insta-kill enemies, and I really flippin' hate jump scares. I've been tricked one too many times into playing a game with an interesting narrative or neat art style only for it to rely on random surprises for a lifetime. So I'm glad when I'm able to find something like Narcosis that can use a creepy atmosphere and horrific setting to create a gripping narrative and some gorgeous imagery. I love it when developers make the most of their medium and use it to create impossible geometry that plays mind games with players, and I was so glad to be able to experience everything this game has to offer without a bunch of flippin' dang jump scare nonsense, or at least nothing all that bad. Narcosis is available for $19.99 US, and even though it's a short game, if you have any interest in narratively driven titles or psychological horror, then I'd say give it a go. Otherwise, if you want something more action-focused or mechanically focused, then you may want to look elsewhere. Thanks for watching, I'm Omega Pie Man, and I'll talk to you guys later. Want to see more quick peeks? Click on the video on the left for SteamWorld Dig 2, a game about exploring and digging. Or click on the video on the right for Autumn Night 3D Shooter, a first-person shooter inspired by those of the 90s.